patron of Science Showoff, Matt Allison! I'm actually a scientist, but I'm talking to you about history, and this is widely considered to be the most confusing period of human history. So we're going to try and do it in 9 minutes. I'm talking about the Wars of the Diadochi. From the period of backward years, they started in 322 and they lasted for 50 years. And you are going to wonder, who are the Diadochi and how could anybody hate each other so much they would fight a war that had no ending that lasted 50 years? And the answer to both of those questions is that they were Greek. And it all started with Alexander the Great. He got a huge empire. He started in Macedonia or Greece, if you ask a Greek or a Macedonian. Then went through the Middle East, then down through Egypt. He took over Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, anything that ended in Stan, and finished in India. When they got to India, they figured they'd bounce on back to Babylon because they were tired conquering. In Babylon, someone said to him, I bet you can't down a shitload of wine. He was like, yes I can, and downed a shitload of wine. What happened to he downloaded a shitload of wine? He vomited everywhere. He vomited everywhere for 11 whole days. And then he died. And the reason why was almost certainly because that wine was poisoned. But this left a problem because his entire huge empire was up for grabs and there were two claimants. Unfortunately, one of them was literally a fetus. It was who was inside the womb of his wife at the time. She was his wife, she outlived him. He was going to be called Alexander IV. And the other claimant was his half-brother called Philip III. And Philip III couldn't rule because, according to historical record, he was possessed by witches, which modern historians actually believe he had autistic spectrum disorder, and there's no humour in that. So we move on. The two leaders of his army, there was Perdiccas, a man in charge of the cavalry, and a man named Meleager, who was in charge of the infantry. Perdiccas supported Alexander IV. Meleager wanted the brother to rule. Meleager was probably racist because Alexander IV was half Iranian, half Greek, and they didn't like that, and anyway, we'll carry on. They had a big argument that took place in Babylon. It was called like the Conference of Babylon, whatever. The outcome was that the two kings would rule together, and Perdiccas would be declared regent, and he would be in charge. He was basically the winner of this argument, and he celebrated winning this argument by stabbing Meleager in the back. He killed Meleager and 300 of his friends and family. He then divided up the empire amongst all the generals, and these guys are called the Diadochi. Perdiccas lived in Babylon with two kings, and that's what they got up to. And then the first war of the Diadochi started because Perdiccas decided he was going to marry Alexander's sister, called Cleopatra. Alexander's sister had previously been married to her own uncle. However, interestingly, on that wedding day, her brother, her mum, and her new husband killed her dad in the church while the ceremony was taking place. But anyway, that guy died when he got into a fight with the Romans. It was a crazy time. Anyway, 4 of the Diadochi who'd taken over didn't like this. They considered this to be a dangerous power grab, which it was because he was trying to make himself king. So they raised an army to attack Babylon, and ridiculously, Ptolemy decided to steal Alexander the Great's corpse and took it with him to Egypt. Literally, this is all true, I'm not making any of this up. Perdiccas raised a huge army and attacked Craterus in Turkey, killing him. He then turned around and was going to attack Ptolemy in Egypt to bring the corpse back when Perdiccas himself was stabbed in the back by the leader of his army, a man named Seleucus the Cator. Seleucus took over Babylon, made peace with all the other Diadochi, and everyone sort of got happily ever after. Antipater, the guy in charge of Greece, who coincidentally was probably the man who poisoned Alexander's wine in the first place, was declared regent, and the two kings moved over to Athens to live with him there. And thus ended the First War of the Diadochi. However, Antipater was well old, so he died 2 years later. And Antipater's son was a man named Cassander, who was a massive cunt. And Antipater hated his son, and then gave the empire to a man named Polyperchon, who was his lieutenant. So he got the crown. This was basically the plot of Gladiator. If you've seen Gladiator, you know that this does not end well. Greece was divided in two. Polyperchon took Alexander IV and fucked off into Albania to hide. Philip III, however, stayed with Cassander and his wife, called Eurydice, who was also coincidentally Philip III's half-sister. She was a very good general. They both raised a huge army, marched into Albania, and then they themselves were stabbed in the back when their entire army just fucked off. And they got killed. Polyperchon also had a massive ace up his sleeve. He had Angelina Jolie in his army, who is Olympias, Alexander's mother. She was also an incredible general. She raised an army, Cassander raised an army, they had a big old ancient Greek show-off. and Cassandra killed Olympias, stole the sun back. Polyperta, realizing that his one bargaining chip was lost and his main ally was dead, decided to fuck off. Meanwhile in Turkey, Antigones and Eumenes decided, they'd picked opposite sides, they both raced these armies, had a big battle. Eumenes lost, Antigones won, and there was peace at last, except there wasn't, because Antigones turned out to be a massive twat. He invaded his two allies, Seleucus in the east and Ptolemy, thank you, in the south. And thus began the third war of the Diadochi. While that was raging on, Cassandra realised that the infant king had actually turned into a rather strapping teenage boy king who asked multiple questions like, why am I not king and why are all my family dead? Cassandra turned around and said, well, maybe you're reversed to be quite brave, and spoiler alert, killed the young king. Sorry. The war raged on for a little bit. Antigones won a few bits, Ptolemy won a few bits, and then they all decided to call it a day and there was peace. Except there wasn't, because Antigones was a massive fucking cunt and invaded literally everybody. Thus starting the fourth war of the Diadochi. Goodness me. Antigones did really well to begin with because nobody was expecting him to be a dick, which is stupid because that's what he does. And so he was winning. While that was happening, over in the east, Seleucus Decatur had been fighting war with the Indians, and he decided that he was going to make peace with them, and he did. So in exchange for a couple of Seleucian cities, the Indians gave him 400 war elephants. Meanwhile, Lysimachus in Thrace decided to invade Turkey, and Ptolemy from the south attacked with 400 war elephants, and they killed him. And there was peace at last! Except, well, there's sort of. So basically, because the entire family were now dead, thanks to this twat, they could all declare themselves kings of their respective empires. And there was, they all declared themselves king, except Ptolemy, who went a bit native and declared himself to be pharaoh. And there was peace for 15 years until the Fifth War of the Diadochi. The Fifth War of the Diadochi was basically the Expendables 2. It was all characters you've heard of, but by this time they were in their 80s. Cassandra died. Nobody took over from him because his two sons were like irritating shits and they both killed each other. So Lysimachus started to move in and took over their empire. Meanwhile, in Egypt, Ptolemy hated his eldest son. He had two sons by two wives, so he decided to disinherit his first son, gave the throne to the second son. The eldest son was a bit pissed at this, and he moved over to Seleucus in what's now called, what was Seleucia, because Seleucus didn't like Babylon, so he set up his own city, named it after himself, because that's what he could do. And meanwhile, in Thrace / bit of North Turkey, Lysimachus had two sons, again by two wives, and the mother of the younger son said, why don't you kill the eldest son? He was like, lol, okay. The mother of the now dead eldest son was pissed, and she moved down to Babylon and said to Seleucus, please avenge my son. And the 83-year-old Seleucus Nicator said, all right then, and they marched up to Turkey, and the two former allies went against each other, and Lysimachus died. Seleucus now owned the largest empire, except he was stabbed in the back by who other than Ptolemy's eldest son. What a dick! He really wanted a throne, so he took over Lysimachus' empire, except he didn't, because in doing so he destabilized the whole thing and got killed by barbarians. But by the way, this guy is Seleucus' son who took over that empire. Ptolemy the Elder died, and I'm so out of time. Yeah, okay, cool. So he died, and then ridiculously, remember the third and fourth wars of the Diadochi I talked about like 3 minutes ago? The son of that guy that we all hated then somehow managed to come back to power and take over Greece and Turkey. He declared himself king, everyone else was a bit like, oh, we can't be asked. Interestingly, this man, Ptolemy II, who ruled Egypt, he, when this guy declared himself king, to make him happy, he married this guy's sister, which was obviously his half-sister, so that's already weird. But when this guy died, the wife of him moved down to Egypt and married literally her brother. That's what these guys did. Anyway, with all that in reign, there was peace at last, except for the part where they all systematically tried to kill the Jews, which was cheeky cheer from the Jews in the corner, which resulted in Hanukkah. You can read all about that in the Book of Maccabees. And then, of course, it was all for naught because the Romans rolled in and killed them all. The score's on the door! There at least 9 backstabbing, 4 siblings married at least once, half siblings married all the fucking time it seems. At least 2 children were murdered by direct relatives. There are more than 50,000 names. I've mispronounced literally every name there because I am a scientist, not a classicist. At least 3 kids were disowned, and it was just a massive clusterfuck. And that is the War of the Diadochi. Thank you very much for listening.
One of the